My data journey, I guess, began probably from when I was born. I've always just loved learning. I've always been very inquisitive and asked a lot of questions. But I didn't discover statistics until high school. I was fairly advanced in math, and so I had completed all of the required math courses. And so there was an AP statistics course that I signed up for. I didn't really know what it was, but my math teacher said that would probably be the next best thing that I should cover. It was probably going to be a college course, and I loved it. I loved statistics. And so I already knew that in college I was going to major in psychology. And then when I got to college, took a psychology class about research methodology, and I was like, I have to switch my major. This has so much math and so much statistics. I love this stuff. I can still learn about people and still do social sciences work, but get to blend that with the statistical part that I really, really enjoyed. So I guess that AP stats class in high school, my senior year of high school, was pivotal for me. And so since then, I think it was my sophomore year in college is when I officially switched my major to statistics. Elon University actually did not have a statistics major. They had a statistics minor. So I started out with a psychology major, stats minor, and when it became available as a major, I switched. And so I graduated with a statistics degree with a psychology minor.
That happened to be when I was very young. I received a Gateway 2000. I'm dating myself. For those that don't know what that is, look it up. That is what my father brought home and put in our basement because that was the only place to have it. And I was fascinated with the icons. But when I continued on to think about what I wanted to do in college, I wanted to know how the icons got on the screen. And so that kind of ushered in my computer science major as an undergrad. But please know that I also am a dancer. So ever since I've been like 4 years old, I've been dancing. So you put on some music and I'm ready to move. So going back and forth between that creative brain as well as the analytical brain is really what spurred my interest in data, because I figured data was running the world back when I started grad school in 2000. And so I love organization and structure. So my tech jam is, databases. Now it's called data engineer. But that happens to be where I find the most comfort. And so getting myself into data science was a natural fit because I already loved organizing data and knew that data was raw and information was more or less actionable data. And then knowledge was this social context around information. So I already had that framing in my mind. So data science to me just seemed like a natural fit.
My journey is not the quote unquote traditional journey. I started college as a biology pre-med major, and I was given the opportunity to start doing research or working in a research lab before I actually started college. So I did that first summer. I worked in a research lab that focused on sickle cell disease. It was a good experience. I was like, I don't know if I could do this forever, but let's just see how it goes. It wasn't bad. And so my first semester, I took general chemistry and did great in it. I ended up making an A in chemistry, but I had to take calculus as part of the pre-med track. And, that was the class that I really enjoyed. But I was like, well, there's nothing wrong with being a doctor, It's a noble profession. And so it wasn't until a friend and I were in our chemistry lab and she grabs the wrong chemical. And so we've now mixed two unknown chemicals together. In the panic, she breaks our mercury thermometer. So at this point, the people with the hazmat suits have now descended upon our lab, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, I don't want to do this. Why am I here? And I realized even when I was working in the lab, the part that I really enjoyed was dealing with the numbers. So I went and talked to my advisor about switching to math. And she was accepting of it, but she was just like, I don't know what you would do with a math degree. But she was like, here are the different options. You could do pure math, applied math, or statistics. And I chose statistics only because statistics allowed me to finish chemistry courses, or else I would have had to start all over with physics. So I did statistics, was offered the same research role by the same program. And I told them, I was like, I've switched my major to statistics. And they're like, well, if you can find a statistician to work with, we'll fund it. And so I reached out to the lab that I had previously worked in. They put me in touch with the statistician who handled their data analyses, and I started working with him. And that's how I discovered biostatistics. And I've been pretty much hooked ever since. In undergrad, I did study math education. I was actually studying the teaching certification exams back in Texas. I'm from Texas. I actually was studying for my certifications when I was accepted to graduate school. I applied to graduate school because I graduated college in 2011, and the US was at the tail end of a recession, and it was very difficult to find teaching jobs in Texas. And so I just thought to myself, okay, well, I'll go get a master's, kind of ride this out, and then come back to teaching. And so I applied to 2 programs, and it was actually a family member, my uncle, who, you know, I'm his baby niece, and he was smart. Why don't you try applying to Harvard or something? And I was like, okay, well, how about Johns Hopkins? I'm like, #1 school of public health in the country. I'll apply there. Will that make you happy? He's like, that would make me happy. So I applied there, and I heard from a professor there. His name's Dan Sharfstein. He's still there. He was a graduate director at the time, and he was like, you know, if you're interested in the master's, you know, we'll accept you. But have you considered a PhD? And I was just like, no, what? It takes a long time, right? At first, I thought it was a prank. And the same friend who broke the thermometer, I called her and I was like, oh, you really got me on this one. And I'm like, she was like, I did not do this. So I talked to him, and he was like, well, how about you come up to Baltimore with the other, you know, PhD applicants, and come talk to us a little bit more, and, you know, see what you want to do. So I did that, came to Baltimore and visited. And I was like, yeah, I think I could do a PhD. I think I can make it. And so they accepted me to the PhD program. I had no clue on earth what a PhD program entailed. I basically lucked into it because I had done nothing to prepare for it. The one thing I will say that I did to prepare myself for graduate school was that I had already learned how to use R. I started using R in like 2008, I want to say. It was still fairly new. But luckily, by the time I got to Hopkins, they were pretty much an R-centered department. So from there, I joined a training program related to aging, or gerontology. So it was a joint epidemiology and biostatistics training program. And so I started learning more about what it means to be aging. And in that, my thesis advisor worked with the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Disparities Solutions. And so then I kind of became interested in how disparities plays a role in our aging process. And so I did a lot of applied sort of implementation of statistics related to those questions, but my dissertation, which is much more methodological, also applied to that area. And so I did a lot of work there. It was a great experience. I just recently published my last paper in that area. I also had a teaching fellowship while I was at Hopkins. So I spent a year teaching undergraduates who majored in public health on an introduction to data analysis. And that was just an amazing experience. Teaching is something that I've always loved to do. I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to do so in graduate school. And at that point, I was all sold to go into academia.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I wanted to do more teaching. So I looked into tenure track positions at liberal arts schools, and also teaching track positions at more research-oriented universities. But my mentor at the time she still works at FDA, and she suggested that I check FDA out. And so I interviewed with them at a conference at the Joint Statistical Meetings of the American Statistical Association. And then they invited me for an on-campus interview, which I was like, I can do this. It was just a drive down the highway. So it's about, I would say 45 minutes to an hour from Baltimore. And I interviewed there. And one thing I noticed is that everyone seemed to be happy with the work that they were doing. And so one thing about academia is that your professors tend to look a little stressed.
So, no comment.
But I was just like, you all seem so happy and relaxed and so invested in your work. And the work that you do has this immediate public health impact. Like, you approve a drug and people start taking it, almost immediately. And then I also realized how much they valued the work-life balance, because my last year of graduate school, I was like, I'm tired. I don't know if I have it in me to get tenure. I'm ready to be settled and live my life. So by the end of that day, I was sold. And even my mentor was shocked when I accepted the offer from FDA. But here I am now, still at FDA. The beauty of the work that I do is that I still have that immediate public health impact, but I have the ability to craft my career as I see fit. So I still get to have opportunities to speak to students, such as I still get to do applied research, which I really like.
So I've held various roles within public, private, and the nonprofit sector, which have really, I think, shaped my ability to look at unique partnerships, looking at driving strategy, looking at data and how that has been informed by cross-sector collaboration and those sorts of things. A couple of quick snippets. I really started my career directly out of graduate school in policy and in directly understanding the impact of policy on people. So I was working as a liaison with the United States Senator from North Carolina, Kay Hagan. Started there for a couple of years. Of course, that experience, you get introduced to a broad range of policies and data and decision making. So I loved that work. Transitioned from there to working with our local Charlotte Chamber of Commerce. I was our Vice President of Economic Growth and also our Vice President of Government Affairs. So I held two different roles there at different times. Really enjoyed that. And again, an opportunity to create impact locally by bringing more jobs to the community, but also connecting economic development, I think in the traditional sense was looked at as strictly bringing jobs, but in the new sense, it has to be looked at as a continuum of education, right? So even preparing the talent pipeline for the jobs. So that was my most recent role before coming into the work with Greenlight Fund, where I'm now leading our investments in Charlotte.
Yes, I want to talk a lot about leadership, but before we get there, can you just tell us what got you started in working with communities? Where does that passion come from? You mentioned graduate school, so if you could tell us what your degree is in, how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, it's been a journey. I will say, it's funny because when I was little, my family says I was always the kid on the block, organizing for something. So I think advocacy has always been a part of my journey, and also just being a natural connector, but then being a connector for a cause. So not just, connecting people, but connecting people to see alignments and see where opportunities and resources can meet. So I think it's kind of in my DNA in that way, but then it's been shaped by different experiences, some of which right after undergrad, I took a year just to kind of figure out what the pathway would be next. And I worked with AmeriCorps as a public ally fellow. And so through that AmeriCorps fellowship, we really dove into critical race theory and education policy and things that were impacting North Carolina school districts. And from there, I said, okay, yeah, I do want to be more of an advocate on policies and programs, particularly as it relates to the impact on communities and communities of color. So I knew that was something I was interested in. Subsequently went to grad school at UNC Chapel Hill and got my master's in public administration and really focused on economic development and education policy.